Good evening. Okay. Welcome to Hot Springs and welcome to our Dyslexia Forum. We're honored to have you here tonight, honored to have you here in my hometown to talk about such an important topic. This is part of a conference that's been going on this morning and will continue tomorrow morning in conjunction with the Arkansas Department of Education. Now, the seminars and workshops and the events that have been happening earlier in the day were for teachers from across the state, and we actually filled up the event area with those teachers, and they had to close the conference to members of the public. But thankfully, we've got this event tonight that's being hosted by my congressional office, where we're able to get or invite in members of the public and people who have an interest in dyslexia that may or may not be associated with education here in the state of Arkansas. A lot of people ask me, well, what's your interest in dyslexia? How did you get involved in this? And I tell them it's been kind of a long process. The first political office I held was on a school board, and I began looking at literacy proficiency scores of third graders, and I saw this can't be good. We're not scoring high enough, not just at the school I was at, but when you look across the state, our reading proficiency wasn't where it needed to be. My wife is a teacher. She's a special education teacher, and she is passionate about dyslexia. So I hear about it a lot. I heard about it a lot back then. I hear about it a lot still today. I got into the state legislature, and Joyce Elliott had a bill she was working on called the Dyslexia Bill. I signed up as a co-sponsor on that, and we got it passed and signed into law. And it was a good first start, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, and there's a lot of tweaking that's happening on that piece of legislation, and we want to make sure that it accomplishes what it was set out to do, to provide testing and diagnosis for young people across our state. Now, fast forward even more, and I get to Congress, and I serve on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. On that committee, the chairman is Lamar Smith, and Lamar had a bill called the READ Act, and he also was chairman of the Dyslexia Caucus. So as soon as I got to Washington, every time I would talk to my wife, one of her first questions was, have you joined the Dyslexia Caucus yet? So it's been kind of a process where I've educated myself on dyslexia, and I've had a lot of coaching from the outside, and I've had a lot of coaching on the pillow beside me at night. But it's a very worthy cause to be involved in. It's something that can mean the difference for thousands of kids across our state and millions of kids across our country. You see, the research shows that as many as 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 5 children in the United States have dyslexia. And think about that. As many as 20% of our children who have learning difficulties in reading. It's also, the research shows that 90% of all learning disabilities include dyslexia. So it's a huge issue. It's something that we can make a big impact on our society with. It's something we can make a huge impact on individuals' lives who suffer with dyslexia. And it's something that we can make a huge economic impact on when we allow people to achieve their potential and to be all they can be in life. So we've got people here who are a lot more knowledgeable about dyslexia than I am. I want to reserve the time for them to speak. I do want to make just some special welcomes here tonight. I know that we've got Representative David Branscombe and Representative Nate Bell from the state legislature here. Is there anybody else from the state legislature that's here tonight? Well, appreciate you all coming. We've got Congressman French Hill's wife Martha. Martha, stand up a second. French is busy at an event in his district, but they're both very passionate about dyslexia education. French was extremely supportive of the READ Act, and we worked together to get that passed into law. It will allow $2.5 million. It will direct the National Science Foundation to put $2.5 million annually into dyslexia research. And again, that's another small step, but one thing the READ Act has done is it's brought dyslexia to the forefront, and more people are becoming aware of it. And we make these little incremental steps, and eventually someday we'll be able to get all the children all across this country the help that they need so that they can not only learn to read, but they can eventually read to learn. As we go through the agenda this evening, Dr. Shaywitz is going to make a presentation, and then we've got other panelists that I'll introduce later that they will tell their stories about dyslexia and where they're working and how it's impacted their life. If you noticed in your program that you got tonight, there's a note card in there. If you have a specific question that you would like to ask Dr. Shaywitz or one of the panelists or me, maybe I think I'm moderating. I get a free pass on questions tonight. But be sure and write that question down and pass it to the end of the row. We'll collect those. And then we're going to have a time at the end where we'll have a couple of microphones out. If you think of a question that you didn't get written down, you can come up to the microphone and ask the question then. I mentioned I'm on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and we're fortunate tonight to have the, I call her the Chief of Staff of the Science Committee here with us, Jennifer Brown. She is very passionate about dyslexia, has 2 dyslexic children of her own, and I'm going to invite her to come up in a moment to introduce our guest speaker, who she has a long and good relationship with. But Jennifer has been working on Capitol Hill with Congressman Smith for over 23 years. She started in his Washington, D.C. office right after graduating from college. What, did you graduate at 12, Jennifer? She was first hired as a staff assistant, but having quickly gained expertise in a range of policy areas, she swiftly worked her way up to hold several titles within the office and eventually became Congressman Smith's Chief of Staff. When Smith was selected to chair the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, she was an obvious choice to take on double duty as Chief of Staff for both offices. During her tenure, Jennifer has spearheaded the committee's efforts to increase funding for dyslexia training and education and has played an integral role in the successes the committee has achieved. She has a BA in political science from the University of Colorado. She's a membership, past and present, of the Everybody Wins reading program at John Tyler Elementary School in D.C., the Children's Hospital Young Perspectives Council, the Junior League of Washington, the Texas State Society. She's a board member and officer there. And Jennifer, if you would come forward and make a few remarks, introduce our keynote speaker for the night, I would much appreciate that. Let's give her a round, warm Arkansas welcome. And while she's coming to the stage, I would also like to say thank you to AETN. They've been very cooperative during this whole conference. They're live streaming our discussions tonight so that people all around the state can see what's going on here at our dyslexia conference, and they can have that educational component without actually coming here to be with us. Jennifer. Thank you.
I'm going to try to multitask here as I prepared some remarks that I would like to read and hold this microphone at the same time. So we'll see if I'm able to accomplish that. But thank you so much, Congressman Westerman, for introducing me and having this great panel. Thank you for making, without Mr. Westerman, this Dyslexia Forum would not have been possible. I'm honored to be with all of you today in Hot Springs to discuss the actions that we are taking at the federal level, which will help students with dyslexia across the country. I also would like to take a moment to thank all of you for sending Congressman Westerman to Washington. Based on his outstanding work here in Arkansas at the General Assembly and his proven leadership abilities as the House Majority Leader, we actively sought him out and recruited him to become a member of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. And we're sure glad he joined us on the committee. Washington needs more members like Bruce Westerman that are interested in getting things done. As a freshman member, I'm going to go, I know he doesn't want me to talk a little bit about him, but I think y'all need to know, as you know, this wouldn't have happened with him, but all the things that he's doing for all of you back in Washington. As a freshman member, we appointed Congressman Westerman to be the vice chairman of the Environmental Subcommittee. And I can assure you, he has not let you down, or he hasn't let us down either. In addition, Congressman Westerman has been one of our dyslexia champions on the Science Committee. He is an active and dedicated member of the Congressional Dyslexia Caucus and is the first member of the caucus to organize and hold a forum like this in his congressional district. So he continues to set the standard. In these roles, he has fought for students with dyslexia through his co-sponsorship of the READ Act, which he spoke about, and I'm going to speak about a little bit later, and his support for dyslexia education and teacher training. Congressman Westerman brings his unique state experience and ideas to the federal landscape as we look for ways to work together to support and implement dyslexia intervention with evidence-based approaches that work. As Chairman Smith says, if a student can't read, it's hard for them to achieve. The difficulty is realized for the 8.5 million school children and 1 in 6 Americans, or 1 in 5, who have dyslexia in the same form. Despite this huge number, many Americans remain undiagnosed, untreated, and silently struggle at school and work. Like all of you here today, I too am committed to shining a light on dyslexia. We need to enable those with dyslexia to achieve their maximum potential. The first step is to help build awareness of dyslexia's effect on those of all ages. This is the main goal of the bipartisan Congressional Dyslexia Caucus, which Congressman Smith co-chairs, and Congressman Westerman is a very active member, as you can see today. More than 100 members of Congress have joined the caucus this session to help champion and increase public awareness of dyslexia. Our mission is to educate members of Congress and the public as well as identify policies that will support those with dyslexia. This is also the top priority of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, for which I'm honored to serve as the Chief of Staff. Despite all the research and the science behind dyslexia, a better understanding of dyslexia and how to successfully intervene and help is needed, and that's why we're all here today. People with dyslexia think and learn differently in a way that others do not. Their brains are wired differently. Many use their unique outlook on the world to their advantage. We know that famous scientists and engineers leverage their dyslexia to provide creative solutions to complex problems. The Science Committee was proud to hold the first ever congressional hearing focused exclusively on dyslexia. The hearing was appropriately titled The Science of Dyslexia. It was only fitting that the leading expert on dyslexia, Dr. Sally Shayowitz, was there to testify at this groundbreaking hearing. We were honored to have her there in Washington and again with us today. The Science Committee has now had several hearings on dyslexia, where we have heard from educators and parents and advocates who are dedicated to ensuring that students with dyslexia do not fall through the cracks. The development of a special curricula and consistent educational tools and early intervention can better enable students to read at their fullest potential. That being said, greater awareness and action is still needed, especially in the areas of how to identify students with dyslexia, implementing specific curricula and the best practices, as well as training and putting more resources in the hands of parents, teachers, and students. This is the goal. Mr. Westerman was talking about the bill that we did in the Science Committee. That was the main goal of the legislation that we introduced. Congressman Westerman was an original co-sponsor of that bill. The official name, which you don't hear about it too often, is the formal title is the Research Excellence and Advancement for Dyslexia Act, or better known to all of you and us as the READ Act. This bipartisan bill helps ensure that millions of Americans have the means to succeed. And as Mr. Westerman explained, we're pleased to tell all of you that the House of Representatives and the Senate passed the READ Act unanimously at the beginning of the month, and the President signed the bill into law last month on February 18th, which is just a huge step in the direction of awareness for dyslexia. The READ Act supports the practical research our expert witnesses, including Dr. Shayowitz, says is most needed: early identification, dyslexia training for teachers and administrators, and evidence-based curricula and best practices that work. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating this, but it's good to repeat just what the READ Act actually does. But the READ Act requires the National Science Foundation to invest at least, so they can spend more, but at the floor is $2.5 million annually, for merit-reviewed, competitively awarded dyslexia research projects that will focus on early detection, early identification, training, and evidence-based curricula and best practices. But we can't stop here. We all need to continue to shine a light on dyslexia in order to help millions of Americans have a brighter and more prosperous future. By doing so, we can help enable those with dyslexia to achieve their maximum potential. I know this is possible, and it works because I am a mother of 2 children, both of whom are dyslexic. Early identification and proper intervention has made the difference in the lives of both my children, and every child should receive that same gift. The READ Act and all the work that Congressman Westerman and our committee members are doing will directly help my children, the children struggling in Arkansas classrooms today, and millions of others like them around the United States. There's so much work to be done, but the READ Act and all the other efforts that continue to happen on the state and federal level is truly a welcome step in the right direction. As a parent, when you find out that your child has dyslexia, the first thing you did, or the first thing you should do, and the thing that I did, is I picked up Dr. Sally Shaywit's book and read it from cover to cover. As a leading expert on dyslexia, her book is the almanac of all things dyslexia and gives a family a hope and a path forward. It's hard to imagine anyone in this crowd doesn't know all the amazing things that Dr. Sally Shaywitz has achieved and her countless years of dedication to the science of dyslexia. We're so thankful. But I would like to highlight a few of her amazing credentials. Dr. Sally Shaywitz is an Audrey G. Ratner Professor in Learning Development at the Yale University School of Medicine. She has authored more than 200 scientific articles and books. Dr. Shaywitz is also an elected member of the Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Sciences. She received her bachelor's degree from the City University and her MD from Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So appropriate, Albert Einstein, who we know we think was dyslexic as well. She is joined today with her husband, Dr. Bennett Shaywitz, who is the Charles and Helen Schwab Professor in Dyslexia and Learning Development and the former Chief of Pediatric Neurology at the Yale University School of Medicine. He's the author of over 300 scientific papers, and he has received many honors for his contributions to understanding the basic neurobiology of reading and dyslexia. The Shaywitz serve as the co-directors of the Yale Center of Dyslexia and Creativity. And together they originated the Sea of Strengths model of dyslexia. The Shaywitz have made a difference in so many lives. I know in mine, and I'm sure many of yours too, and they are true champions of dyslexia. Every time I hear them speak, I learn something new. So I know we all look forward to hearing how and why acting now is so important to our future. Without further ado, I'm honored to welcome the dynamic duo of dyslexia, Dr. Sally and Bennett Shaywitz. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was very gracious.
Okay, well, let me add both my welcome and appreciation for all of you being here this evening, and thank you, Jennifer, and also a deep sense of appreciation and thanks to Congressman Westerman for caring so much and doing so much. So what I thought and what we thought we'd share with you this evening is things you may not hear so much about. And so we're going to talk about dyslexia, a national epidemic of reading failure. And what we hope to do is provide you with both an explanation of this national epidemic and a potential solution. So as Jennifer was mentioning, in 2014, I spoke before the Congressional Space Science and Technology Committee on the science of dyslexia. And what I thought and continue to think is incredibly important is that in the case of dyslexia, you know, obviously we want to learn more and hope to through the Research Act funding, but we know enough to do a better job. So rather than a knowledge gap, we have an action gap, which is really incredible in the 21st century. And our goal, too, is that it's like, here's science, here's education, and they're not talking to each other. So we have to get them together and align education with 21st century science. The problem is that we have you'll have to excuse me because I have to face this way so I'm not looking at you, that we have a national epidemic of reading and academic failure. Science tells us that dyslexia may be at the root of these difficulties. The problem is that the scientific knowledge is not being used to address and remediate dyslexia. So our hope is that schools, of course parents, legislators, need to increase their awareness of dyslexia. We've made progress. You just heard Jennifer talking about the READ Act, Congressman Westerman, and I've sort of detailed some of the progress, but I can just skip that. So what I want to talk to you about now is, so how does science inform dyslexia? What have we learned from science that helps us better understand dyslexia? Well, one is that dyslexia is an unexpected difficulty. By unexpected, I mean that you can be very smart, and you know what? Still struggle to read. So that becomes very, very important. And I think that IDA actually has left that out in the 204 or whenever it was revision. So one important acceptance of this was the 21st century definition of dyslexia, which is given in the Senate Resolution 275, bipartisan, the Cassidy-Mikulski one. So that is a major step in aligning science and education, that dyslexia is an unexpected difficulty in reading for an individual who has the intelligence and the motivation to be a much better reader. So, and you know what? I'm going to show you now the evidence. How's that? So this is a paper we published with colleagues in 2010 in the Journal of Psychological Science. So here you see a typical readers, okay? And what you see is this is IQ, and this is reading. And the jargony term is they're dynamically linked. So in typical readers, IQ and reading, I call them kissing cousins. They go together, and they influence one another. So if you're very smart, you can be a good reader. And if you're a very good reader, you're probably going to be really smart. And that's how this thing started. Well, if you don't read well, you can't be smart. But we decided to outfox those folks. We actually started to study dyslexic people and compare them to typical readers. And here's the results when we did that. So here you see IQ, but look at this. Reading is much lower. They're not kissing cousins. They don't even want to talk to each other. And they don't influence each other. So you can have a high IQ and read at a much lower level. And anyone who wants this to take into their school to show that you can have an unexpected difficulty in reading and still be dyslexic, just write to me and we'll get it to you, because it's really important. To take that away is saying, well, if you're dyslexic, you can't be very smart. And that's not true. So that's a piece of evidence. No, did you want me?
No, I wanted to at some point talk.
Oh, he was supposed to say this.
I only want to do it because I want to preserve her for the ending.
So it's my great pleasure.
can't get them to stop talking. It's just the strangest thing. Well, one of the things that we'd like to convey is how, in talking about science of dyslexia, is that dyslexia is really a very specific scientific entity. And the term learning disabilities is really nonspecific. And I thought you should have a sense of at least how this evolved. And the very first description of dyslexia in the modern era was in 1896. And it was actually called congenital word blindness. And in the early part of the 20th century, there were many, many papers about dyslexia. And then suddenly in 1962, learning disability emerged de novo out of the minds of an educator, Sam Kirk, and his associate, Bateman. And they actually created it by using dyslexia as a model. Between 1962 and the current, and really now, we've had scientific validation of dyslexia. We know the epidemiology, and I'll show you that in a minute, how many people are affected. We know the cognitive basis. Sally, you'll talk a little bit about that. We know that it's unexpected. We just talked about that. We know the neurobiology. I'll show you a few slides about that. And we know evidence-based identification, and we know interventions. The other learning disabilities really await scientific validation. They're not really clearly defined, and they remain very general and nonspecific. And Sally likes to use this as an example of thinking about the difference between dyslexia and the term learning disabilities. Learning disabilities is a much more general term. It's akin to if you have an infection, you say, I have an infectious disease. Dyslexia, on the other hand, is very specific. You can say, I have a strep throat. The term strep throat is very specific. It implies you know that the streptococcus organism causes that sore throat, and you know that the intervention that's appropriate is penicillin. So it's very, very different. One is very specific, one is very general. Turns out that of the learning disabilities, dyslexia makes up the great bulk of learning disabilities, 80 to 90%. That's been very well documented. We know who and how many are affected by dyslexia. We know that it's universal. It affects every racial, ethnic, social groups. In the United States, there are at least 1 in 5 children. I say at least because I'll show you some data from recent NAEP surveys showing even more. But that means that in the United States, there are 10 million children. Every classroom has children who are struggling readers and who are dyslexic. We also know that dyslexia is especially prevalent, and it's often unrecognized in children of color and children who are disadvantaged. This is a slide I've taken from the 2013 NAEP. The 2015 NAEP is just almost identical. And what this shows is the percentage of children who are below basic. White children, it's 21%. African American children, it's 50%. So you see these great differences in the prevalence of dyslexia. These reading difficulties in children of color and disadvantaged children are often written off to environmental issues or lack of ability. But it's our belief that what's happening is many of these children are dyslexic. Their problems are not diagnosed, they're not addressed, they're not remediated. And you can only address these problems if the child is identified. We know that dyslexia affects both boys and girls approximately equally. We know that it's persistent, it's lifelong. I have a caution here, and that is that if you look at the SI stands for school identified prevalence rates, they're much, much lower. And if you look at some of the data that's used national data that's primarily from schools, there's a failure to identify dyslexia, and so the prevalence rates are very low, anywhere from 0 to 3 to 4%. In research studies in which all the children are surveyed, all children in a selected population, a sample survey, are surveyed, anywhere from 17.5% to 21% of those children are diagnosed as dyslexic. That's one in 5 children. And the emphasis here is that if you're going to count the children, you first have to identify them. And I've included this slide from the 2015 NAEP, which shows that a third of the children, this is aggregate US population, are below 31% are below basic, approximately the same as it was in 2013. And so it may be even higher. So when we say 1 in 5, it could be a lot higher. So you know Sally's book, Overcoming Dyslexia, but what you may not know is that it's been translated into a number of languages. Dyslexia is universal. It occurs in every language. Not only, her book is translated not only into many alphabetic languages, but it's been translated into Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and here Sally is with a group of Japanese dyslexic students and their parents and teachers when on a visit to Japan. And the Japanese are getting much more interested in dyslexia. They finally sort of tumbled to the fact they didn't have a word for dyslexia until a few years ago. Let me turn now to what we know about the neural systems in dyslexia, because that's been very helpful in sort of demonstrating that, in really showing that dyslexia is no longer a hidden disability. We use a technology called functional magnetic resonance imaging. Here is Casey, who's one of the children who participates in our studies, and she's in the imager. Many of you have had MRIs for headaches or knee injuries or a variety of things. It's the same imager that's used clinically. Casey's looking up through a prism, and she's looking at some tasks that we show her that relate to phonology. And using this kind of technology, scientists around the world have replicated what is termed a neural signature for dyslexia. And that is an inefficient functioning of those brain systems in the back of the brain. So this is a picture from Sally's book. You see, here's the front of the brain and the back of the brain. We're looking at the left side of the brain. In typical readers, we see if you ask them to do a phonologic task, brain systems that are activated is 1 in the front of the brain and 2 in the back of the brain. If you ask the same question to dyslexic children, there's an inefficient functioning of these systems in the back of the brain, perhaps a little more in the front of the brain, activation in the front of the brain. But this is a finding that's been replicated again and again and again in every language that's been studied. And I'll show you an example. This is a study by a colleague of ours, Geraldo Polisu, who works in Milan, Italy. And Polisu studied college students with dyslexia in England, France, and Italy. And here's the front of the brain, the back of the brain. And regardless of the language spoken, these same systems in the back of the brain were disrupted, regardless of the language spoken. And since Polisu published this paper over a decade ago, this has been, the same findings have been replicated in German dyslexic students and even Chinese dyslexic students. Slight variations in Chinese, but primarily the same. What neuroscientists are doing now is trying to see how these systems are connected. And in current neuroscience, people recognize that the brain is a very well-connected organ, and people no longer talk about left brain, right brain, but they talk about an extensive and interconnected system of processes in the brain that communicate with one another. And I'll show you some images from a paper that we published a year or so ago showing connectivity in dyslexia. And it looks like a hodgepodge, but what you see is just tremendous connections. This is from some of our from children, and here's some of the adolescents. Very, very much tremendous connectivity. But what there is the connectivity is disrupted in dyslexic readers to an area of the brain in the back of the brain called the word form area. And that's critical to reading fluency. And we also see disruption in connectivity between systems for reading and systems for attention. And that's, again, something that's been replicated again. So I think I'll stop in a moment, but I think what we have learned from brain imaging is something very important. There is a neural signature for dyslexia. And that neural signature is inefficient functioning of those neural systems for skilled, fluent reading. And I think the importance is that for the first time, it's made a hidden disability visible. And that, I think, is very helpful for dyslexic children and adults. I'm going to stop now, and Sally's going to resume and talk a little bit about the clinical aspects of dyslexia. What's the cognitive basis? What do we do about interventions? And she's also going to talk somewhat about some of the newer things that are happening, that people are learning about RTI and about Common Core. So, Sally?
Thank you. So I want to focus on how science informs dyslexia, and really, so importantly, like, what is dyslexia? What's the nature of reading and dyslexia? And what is the cognitive basis? And that's really important. So the question is, why when we look at something, a book, a page, why does it have meaning? You know, we as humans didn't evolve to read print. We evolved to speak. So what enables us to be able to read? And because, as I said, speaking is natural, reading is acquired. Well, what we've learned is the lines and circles of print take on meaning when they're linked to something that has inherent meaning. And that something is the sounds of spoken language. And a particular component of spoken language, phonology, which refers to the sounds. And Leonard Bloomfield, way back in almost a century ago, I think got it right when he compared the relationship of spoken language to print. And he said writing is a way of recording language by visible marks. So, and it's due to a difficulty, dyslexia is due to a difficulty in getting to the individual sounds of spoken language. And it's so easy to say, but what it is, for print to make sense, when a person is learning to read as a child, they have to be able to take apart the sounds of spoken words, like, so mat, to pull it apart into the and t, and that way they can link the letter to the sound that it represents. And for those, most people, what's the big deal? You do it automatically, unconsciously, without thinking about it. But for people who are dyslexic, that is a huge barrier. And what's so important about understanding that, it gives us a clue to know what to look for that are the symptoms of dyslexia. I always get a little frustrated when I see people sort of pulling apart the symptoms and making each of them a different disorder. So if you know that they all reflect the difficulties in getting to the sounds of spoken language, it's not so surprising that people who are dyslexic have problems in spoken language. For example, word retrieval, have difficulties in attaching letters and sounds, in reading accurately and then fluently, problems in spelling. If reading is decoding, spelling is encoding. You go from the spoken word to try to represent it in print. And something that I think is really important in learning a foreign language. Some people it comes so natural to, There may be a few dyslexics who can learn a foreign language well, but they're few and far between. So knowing the origin of the difficulties is key to the recognition of the simple symptoms of dyslexia. So the question is, what is dyslexia? What does dyslexia look like? And this is really important for parents and educators to know. Because if your children or students are dyslexic, it's going to be in front of you, but if you don't know, you don't recognize it. So this is what Jennifer was referring to, our Sea of Strengths model of dyslexia. Because dyslexia, what I'm trying to say is it's basically a paradox. So what you have, we refer to an island of weakness. Here I wrote decoding, but surrounded by a sea of strengths in higher level cognitive processes. So what you want to be able to do is identify the weakness and identify the strengths. And then you want to be able to remediate the weakness, but make sure there's access to the strengths, most commonly through accommodations. And to give you an example of that, we had a fantastic conference at Yale in October of this year that really showed the paradoxical nature of dyslexia. We called the conference Slow Readers, It Takes a Dyslexic Brain. I'm sorry, Slow Readers, Fast Thinkers, It Takes a Dyslexic Brain. And what we did is we had an incredible panel. I was the moderator, and here's attorney David Boyes. I don't know if everyone here knows who he is, but he's a brilliant, brilliant attorney. He's the one, when they write up attorneys, if you need an attorney, he's the one you want to get. Toby Cosgrove, he's a cardiac surgeon and CEO and president of the Cleveland Clinic. Next, I don't know how many of you watch it. I don't know if it's still on Entourage on television. The center character there is Ari, modeled after Ari Emanuel, who is right here. And then Brian Grazer, who is an Academy Award-winning producer of Beautiful Minds, etc. And Diane Swank, who you may see on television talking about economics and making it understandable. And what they all have in common is they're slow readers, fast thinkers, and are at the top. Each one is on top of their profession. So we were, to say delighted doesn't do it justice, to have them on our panel. And what they did is they answered very graciously questions. And I wanted to pull out, well, what was it like growing up? What was school like? And Toby Cosgrove, the cardiac surgeon, said many times people invite him to give a talk. And they say, well, what's the title of your talk, Dr. Cosgrove? And he says, I'm going to use the F word. And people go, oh, the F word. He said, yes, failure. Because so much of what I experienced in growing up was failure. And then each of these individuals who had reached the highest level of their profession, very competitive professions, told about how horrible it was growing up, the fears, the inability, the worries, just one after another, to the point that these icons, we were written up in page 6 of the New York Post, so they were icons, but were crying in their descriptions of what it felt like to be a dyslexic student, a dyslexic young person growing up, and how they would never have imagined a future. So dyslexia is a paradox. You have all this potential, but then you have the horror of growing up. And Bennett and I have gotten to know, as you might imagine, so many dyslexic people. And when we see them as adults, so competent, so in leadership positions, we think, why didn't the school recognize these abilities? Why did they feel stupid? Why did they feel isolated? Why did they feel they had no worth? I mean, it's amazing to see these people. And very often, I'll share a story with you. Charles Schwab is dyslexic, and he's spoken at some events we've had, and he said, well, you know, when we're talking about a problem, I can see the end zone, while others are still going step by step. And he says sometimes it upsets them, well, how did you get to that point? How did you know that? So this is what's in many, many, many people who are dyslexic. And we have to, educators, parents, figure out a way to recognize that and support that. So a child like these very, very capable, awesome people don't grow up feeling so badly about themselves and so fearful. So here's something, I travel a lot, and Congressman Westerman will tell you, if you're sitting near me, what are you going to hear about? Dyslexia. Trust me. And so I'm on a lot of planes, trains, etc. And invariably, somehow the conversation turns to dyslexia. I don't know. And what happens, I'll say to a person, well, what is dyslexia? Well, you know, it's when people reverse the letters. It never fails. It could be the CEO of a major company, the head of a university, or the porter. You know, it's universal. So I thought, well, I've got to make up something small and portable to give people. And so we made up this card, and it says, as you can see, are you a slow reader? An out-of-the-box thinker. Could you be dyslexic? So what I did here is for every weakness paired a strength. So you can see the paradox of dyslexia. So it says, do you read slowly and with much effort? Check. But are often the one to solve the problem. Can spell? Check. Have messy handwriting? But your writing shows terrific imagination. So you come to think, why when somebody writes something with such imagination but spelled 2 words wrong, do they get a D? Rather than saying, I'm so proud of your creativity and your imagination. Have trouble remembering dates and names? Yep. But think out of the box and grasp the big picture. And finally, have difficulty retrieving and processing spoken words, but have an excellent vocabulary and ideas. So that's the paradox. So every time there's something a dyslexic can do, we have to remember what they can do and reinforce that. Because as someone said to me, we can teach people to read, but it's hard to teach them to think. So in a sense, the dyslexics get the better part of the bargain because they can think. So here's something that we developed, is the dyslexia, the origin of the difficulties getting to the sounds of spoken language. So if you're going to do that, you're going to have problems in word retrieval. So a child's in front of the class, and the teacher says, well, what country this and that? And something totally different comes out of his mind. And we've learned about the mechanism of that. So we know conceptually the child has it, but to say the word, you have to access and retrieve those damn phonemes. And, right? And that's what people who are dyslexic have trouble doing. So, and the teacher said, why are you doing that? You knew that yesterday. Yeah, and he knows it today, it's just not coming out of his mouth. So that's one of the symptoms. You know, again, connecting letters and sounds, being able to read accurately and then read fluently, spelling, and honestly, I can't stop talking about that. I've seen so many essays, tests, a history test, that a child got a D in because they spelled things wrong. I mean, come on now. Are you testing history or spelling? And even for essays, you want to maybe give a grade for grammar and spelling, but give one for imagination and creativity. And then foreign language. It's better at college. than high schools, trying them to recognize the difficulty. I am extremely proud to tell you that about 2 decades ago, I'm really old, I went to the head of Yale and I said, we have to start giving waivers to dyslexic students so they don't have to take foreign language. They need to take a course in the history or culture of a country that doesn't speak English. And I got a lot of support. Then I had to go and meet with the foreign language department. Oh my God. I was so scared, and I had a right to be scared, because they were glaring at me. Because I was just telling them that their course wasn't going to be essential anymore. So if looks could kill, I would not have walked out of their room. But they're good Yaleys, and they cooperated. So now they call me and say, you know, Dr. Shields, I have this wonderful young man in my class. He's tried, he's been tutored, and he just can't master it. And it's sucking away the time and energy from things he could master. So it's been incredibly successful. And I tell all of you, because if your parents, go to the school and ask for this. If your teachers, make sure your children get this. Because it's critical, it's not a favor. So many of the students want to take the foreign language because it goes with their major or their interest, but they just can't do it. So we have to make sure that what science tells us about getting to the sounds of spoken language is a major problem in dyslexia, so we don't do this to students. And I'll just tell you quickly, we're often asked to give AYA, Association of Yale Alumni, lectures. And when I mentioned this, and one year a very well-known man came down the stairs at the end of the lecture with tears going down his eyes. He was a Yale graduate. And he said, oh, thank you, God bless you, Dr. Shields. When I was at Yale, I struggled through French. And finally, my professor said, I will pass you on 2 conditions. The first is you can say, je m'appelle, whatever, in French. And the second, and this is the more important one, you cannot tell anyone you took French at Yale. So just to summarize, because when you know it when you see it. So word retrieval difficulties, struggles to retrieve words, and it's on the tip of your tongue. You know it conceptually, it just doesn't, you can't program the muscles of articulation. Trouble learning letters and letter sounds, sounding out words, and a lack of a strategy for reading new words. What do I do with it? How do I do it? Oh my God, reading aloud. We have had the privilege of meeting with some most renowned people who are dyslexic. That's the key to entry. You have to be dyslexic. And I'll say to them, what was school like? And the face drops, eyes full of tears, the horror of reading aloud. Universal. And the little comments of the other kids in the class, and you hear about it at recess, and often the teachers say, how could you not know this? So we have special recommendations that are made about when children should be called on and not. And the other is slow reading. People who are dyslexic can be big thinkers. They can read relatively accurately, but they're not going to read quickly because they're not fluent readers. They can't read automatically. And that becomes so important because all of us have a bucket of attention available. When you're dyslexic, you're not reading automatically, you're reading what I call manually. So you're going into that bucket of attention and going in and going in. So you're going to be a slow reader, tired from reading, and look like you have no attention because you used it up. So it becomes important to what lack of fluency means, and also have difficulties in spelling. So what are the barriers? Schools that are unwilling to diagnose or accept the diagnosis of dyslexia. What I always say, schools will sometimes say, we choose not to recognize. I say, when it comes to religion, you choose what you want. But when it comes to a validated scientific condition that affects the lives of 20% of the children, you don't have that choice. It's real. The children don't have that choice, and you don't have it. Another barrier is the failure to provide evidence-based interventions and accommodation. I'm going to say more about that. And the failure to address the whole child. This is happening to a human being that has a soul and a heart and dreams, etc. So this isn't just you can't read the word, it's about the whole child. So I want to focus on current practices that are not working for dyslexic students. First and foremost is the failure to appreciate the importance of scientific evidence. These aren't just words, these have meaning. So the ignoring of scientific evidence or using programs and methods that lack scientific evidence. And this is very important. You hear a lot, oh, this is research-based. That doesn't equal evidence. That's one of the most important things you're going to hear. No Child Left Behind was full of research, scientifically by SBRR. That doesn't mean anything. It means there's a theory. And it sounds like a good theory, but when theories are tested, 80 to 90% of them don't pan out. So just saying research-based is not meaningful. It makes the children become experimental subjects because there's no evidence. Evidence means that there's been a randomized clinical trial comparing two approaches, and data shows that one treatment is actually superior to the other. That is the gold standard. That's what you have to look for. And when vendors from different programs come to you, oh, this is evidence-based, you know what you're going to say? Show me the evidence. Where was this published? Well, and so research-based makes it interesting. I wouldn't want my child to be taught by something that doesn't have evidence. Neither would anybody else. You have to make sure it's evidence-based and published in a scientific, peer-reviewed published data. Another place that the READ Act can make a big difference is encouraging studies to be carried out, examining whether a program actually has evidence. So that would make a huge difference as well. So the National Reading Panel in 1998 Congress became very concerned that there seemed to be an epidemic of reading problems. So they had a National Reading Panel appointed. I was honored to serve on that panel. And we did a report. You can't see it here, but I'll read it to you if I can see it. Report of the National Reading Panel, an evidence-based assessment of the scientific research literature on reading and, what does it say? Implications. And implications for reading intervention. So what we did is actually looked for evidence, summarized the evidence, synthesized it, and reporting on it, and that's where you get to read. Children must be taught phonemic awareness, phonics, reading fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. What this didn't do is mention specific programs. So it's like if you were going to bake a cake, here are the ingredients. But what we need to learn is how to put them together, for whom, etc. Another practice that is not working for dyslexic students is delaying identification of dyslexia and the provision of evidence-based interventions. Reading growth, and that's been well documented, is maximal the very first years of school. Then it plateaus. So there's new data showing that the reading gap between typical readers and dyslexic readers, you know when it's already present? First grade. first grade, and I'll show you. It was our paper that demonstrated this. So here you see, here's typical readers, here's dyslexic readers, here is first grade. And this gap, trust me, it's very, very large. And it is extremely difficult to narrow, and it goes on and on and on. You can narrow it a little, but not a whole lot. So think if you had started intervention earlier, identified kids, and given them the intervention they need, you wouldn't be seeing this. And here, you know, it's easy to say gap, but what goes with that? Not learning to read, but feeling you don't belong in school. And all the other negative things that happen. I'm going to talk about that later. So we have to identify children earlier. You can't wait. It doesn't magically click in at a certain age, or somehow it starts to work early, early, early. And here it is. Students must receive evidence-based instruction at the start of school experience and their progress carefully monitored. Waiting is harmful. It's not acceptable. Because so often, well, let's wait till next year. Let's see how I just get that feeling he's going to catch on. I'm sorry? Yeah. So the other practice, and this may surprise you, is RTI, response to intervention. It was a good idea. But what happens far too often is with education is good ideas are not tried out. There's no piloting. There's no figuring out, well, what do we mean by response? What level? How long? All the details of implementation. So there's a federally funded, large, good study that was just reported in November in Ed Week Warehouse. And the headline was, RTI practice falls short of promise. First graders who were identified for more help fell further behind. First graders who received reading interventions via the RTI framework actually did worse than virtually identical peers who did not get the more targeted assistance, according to the study released by the National Center for Educational Evaluation and Regional Assistance. So this is a good study. And the people who did the study were very honest. They said, this is not what we expected. We thought this was going to reaffirm how good RTI is. And here I'll just show a few things. This is what's called effect sizes, higher, better. And what they found was in many areas worse, some a little bit better, but mostly worse. And here is at the school level, and here is 0, better be above than below. And it says here, the number of schools with negative impacts were 81, and 15 of the 81 were statistically significant. And the number of schools with positive impact were 38, but only 4 were significant. So this tells us that when something new comes out, we just don't throw it out there. We have to test it. And in fact, when RTI came out, Cecil Reynolds, who's a professor in Texas, and I wrote 2 articles questioning why there wasn't more investigation of the implementation of RTI, how to do it right. And in the articles that have been written just recently about RTI, that's what they said. They don't know why they're not doing better. But implementation is so vague and so not scientifically based that may very well be a reason. Now we're getting juicier. Another practice not working for dyslexic students is Common Core. Yes, Common Core. So dyslexia and Common Core state standards and tests such as the PARC that are designed to assess whether students are meeting the Common Core state standards. It's unequivocal that Common Core state standards and accompanying tests such as the PAR are totally inappropriate for dyslexic students. Now, this is really important because it's like a fad. You know, it's suddenly taking the country and harming dyslexic students because such tests are based on the mistaken belief that all students, including dyslexic students, will be fluent readers by the end of second grade. So how many of you have seen dyslexic students who are fluent readers by the end of second grade? I don't see any hands, you? So, I mean, it's bizarre. And that all students should read at grade level and above. Clearly an expectation that ignores all that has been learned about the development of reading in dyslexic children. And it's focused on comprehension, that's focused on reading instruction using complex text. And I was reading about how they pick complex tests. It's ridiculous. I think the idea of people to do deep reading and think about the comprehension is a good one. But at third grade, that's not appropriate for dyslexic students at all. And somebody has to have the bravery to step up and call this out because it's really harming. It's harming children and it's harming teachers. Oh, you're a bad teacher. Your second grade dyslexic student isn't a fluent reader? Okay. So the point is, this has serious implications for dyslexic students. The virtual total focus on comprehension may be appropriate for students in later grades, but at the beginning of reading, not to teach them how to read and expect them to do complicated comprehension because the Common Core PARC test, for example, at third grade is really a fifth grade test. I tried to take it online. I thought, oh, maybe I don't read as well as I think. And especially in earlier grades, when dyslexic students are still struggling with and working hard to master decoding. And it can be dangerous. It provides misleading data with serious consequences. And finally, professional development that's not based on scientific evidence. The evidence has to show that there's improved student outcome. And that's not what's happened. I sat on the board of IES, Institute of Education Science, and one of the Beltway companies had evaluated a test, professional development program that some of you may have heard about, letters. And people say, oh, letters is great. Well, actually, the teachers learned something, but the students didn't. So we have to figure out what's the outcome measure. The outcome measure has to be the benefit to the student. Okay. So for dyslexic students, I'm almost done. The cost is very high. Child who's not identified doesn't receive evidence-based instruction. They continue to struggle. They see themselves as a failure and not smart, i.e. dumb. They have no knowledge of what their difficulty is, that it has a name. They have no self-awareness of why they can't do what their peers can do. They're bullied, they're teased. And you've probably all heard this too. They'd rather be sent as a discipline problem to the principal's office than have to read aloud in front of their peers. That's not good. They see themselves as not meant for school, they drop out, and we have this incredible personal and societal cost that students drop out. They go to prison, they get involved with drugs, and many, unfortunately, commit suicide. So they don't go on to college, they have significantly higher unemployment and lower lifetime earnings. I was going to just read you some, let's see what time it is. Maybe I shouldn't.
We're a little bit over.
Okay, I won't. I was going to read you something that a mother just sent me on Saturday. about how her 31-year-old son didn't get the interventions he needed, and now he's an adult and was failing in life. Because even for sort of lower level jobs, you have to take some kind of test. And he can't do that because he can't even read well enough for accommodations. That in school, he only told her recently how he was in a class that had all sorts of disabilities, how he wasn't taught to read, and how awful he felt. Shorter than I would have read. So for effective reading intervention for dyslexia, early diagnosis and intervention, the school climate has to be aware of the impact of dyslexia. And by that I mean the child's going out for 45 minutes for tier 2, comes back to a classroom. Does that teacher understand dyslexia? Does his history teacher or biology teacher? Do they know what to do with him, how he reads, what helps him? So you need a school climate that everybody's on board. Small classes. It really does make a difference. Evidence-based methods, knowledgeable, flexible, caring teachers, instruction that's intense, that means small groups, many teacher-student exchanges, and sufficient duration, and consistency in instruction across all classes. And one of the things that's been written about RTI, the students would be getting one thing in their pullout for RTI, and their in-core instruction would be something totally unrelated. So rather than building on each other, they actually confused more than anything. And teachers have to be in constant communication about the students. There are models, there are new models that work, and I'm going to just share one of those with you. And that is the creation of dedicated specialized schools focusing on dyslexia. There are a number of schools, one in New York, Windward, California, Park Century, Oakwood, and Virginia, and one in Louisiana called Louisiana Key Academy. So the goal is to reach children at risk for dyslexia early on when reading intervention is maximally effective before the students fall further behind. This is the Windward School, and this is Louisiana Key Academy. Here at the Windward School, tuition is $52,000 a year. Don't we all have that? At the Louisiana Key Academy, it's free to all. So it's something to think about. And now I just want to say a couple of words about accommodations. Accommodations make a difference, particularly as kids get older, for kids who've shown incredible effort and perseverance over many years. Their slow reading and high intelligence, but 24/7 work ethic, and I think what hurts so many dyslexics so much when they don't have accommodation and they don't do well on tests. But I worked so hard. I studied so long. I really understood it, but I didn't have the time. So there's what I've been talking about, the disparity between their reading speed, which is slow, and the level of thinking is high. So it's critical for ensuring that the test is measuring ability rather than disability. And what happens in the brain, this is what Bennett showed you, these 3 systems for reading, and particularly right here in the back of the left side of the brain, it's called the word form area. So people who are dyslexic, that area doesn't develop very efficiently. So there's frontal areas and right-sided ones. So if you're a typical reader, you see a word and you're on the highway, the express highway. If you're dyslexic, it's as if there's a barrier and you have to get off the express highway and get onto the country road. It's bumpier, it's more circuitous. You can get there, it's going to take you a lot longer, and you're going to work a lot harder because you don't have this available, but have these ancillary systems. So you get partial compensation. So recommendations, we want to align education with 21st century science. Schools must not be allowed to ignore or fail to recognize dyslexia. we think that specialized schools for dyslexic students may be a big help. And mainly, we have to act now. You can't tell a child, hold your breath, wait. It just doesn't happen. And we all, literally children, have one life to live. So you want to use the word dyslexia. It's highly relevant. And you get anxious when you don't know what's going on. This way you know what you have has a name, and also what it is and what you can do about it. Science provides the definition, epidemiology, and so forth about dyslexia. A student knowing they're dyslexic is so empowering because they have self-understanding and self-awareness for the first time of what she has and what she needs to do in order to succeed. It provides students, too, with a community to join. You're not isolated with whatever it is. You have dyslexia, and there are other dyslexic people who are good people, intelligent people. For parents and teachers, and importantly, the student, the knowledge that she's dyslexic brings with it the information that the individual is not stupid or lazy. So I'm going to just summarize that children begin school, and there are two possible routes. Many, but I've said two. So here, where the child is undiagnosed, EBI is evidence-based interventions. They don't get that, or accommodations. So they have school failure and unrealized potential. Low self-esteem, so it's a loss to themselves, but also to society. So their life is characterized by weakness and what might have been. On the other hand, if a student is diagnosed and receives evidence-based intervention and accommodations, they have the self-knowledge, they experience academic success and a feeling of empowerment and fulfillment, and they're a contributor to society. So their potential is realized, and to summarize a movie, It's a Wonderful Life. And we have to make sure that more and more of our dyslexic children have that. And here, I've tried to show, like an iceberg, so many of the children now, because they're not identified, are underwater, unseen seemingly, raising their hands, asking for help. We see here the people I talked about that were on our panel: David Boyes, Ari Emanuel, Diane Swank, Dr. Toby Cosgrove, and Brian Grazer. So it shows you it's possible. But there's such a small slice of the dyslexia student population. We have to make sure that we get to all these kids who care and who are intelligent and want to learn, and help them do so. So I'm here representing the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, and again to emphasize that in dyslexia, the major problem is not a knowledge gap, but an action gap, and to thank you for your attention and patience and tolerance, particularly you, Representative Westerman.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
You know, there is a lot to admire about the dynamic dyslexic duo, their research, their commitment to helping people, but it's the compassion that I see. It's the passion that they have for their career and for other people. You know, she's been doing this all day long. This is not the first time she's spoken today. We went to lunch with her today, and she hardly ate any lunch because all she wanted to talk about was dyslexia. I love that passion. I appreciate them so much for coming here to Arkansas and sharing with us. We're going to move on. We've got other guests here we want to hear from tonight. Some real-life experiences of what's being done in other parts of the world to address dyslexia, and also some real-life experiences of a person that struggled with dyslexia. So next I want to introduce Rachel Vitti. She is a career educator, a wife, and a mother of 4. She's the architectural founder of the Grasp Academy, which is a public school of choice in Jacksonville, Florida. It is designed to fully serve students who fit a dyslexia profile. One of these schools, like Dr. Shaywitz was talking about. Her husband, Dr. Nikolai Vitti, is the superintendent of Duval County Public Schools, which includes Grasp Academy. Her work as a champion of public schools began as a classroom teacher in New York City. Her shift into dyslexia research and advocacy began when she recognized the lack of evidence-based resources within the public school setting for bright students who struggled to adequately read. Currently, she serves as the executive director of the Grasp Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization designed to engage, enlighten, and empower the families, students, and staff associated with the Grasp Academy. She received her master's degree in teaching from Salem College and a bachelor's of science from Wake Forest University. Please help me welcome Rachel Vitti. You go ahead and go, and then I'll introduce you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm excited to be here. It was actually a dream come true to sit on a stage with Dr. Shaywitz and share our experience. As a mother of four, you recognize how frustrating the world of exceptional education can be. And I was born and raised in a family that you don't just sit and watch from the sidelines, but you actually jump in with both feet and do something about it. And so when we recognized that our oldest son was struggling in school, we had to do something about it. My husband and I got into public education because we felt that education was a great equalizer, right? If everyone had a great education, the world would be a better place. And we were at a pivotal moment in an IEP meeting one day, and we looked at each other and said, you know what? Public school's not working for our child. What do we do? We couldn't necessarily give up on something that we so strongly believed in. And so instead of continuing to bang our head up against the wall, we said, let's change it. And so we're privileged to be in the position with him as superintendent of schools in Duval County to actually make that change. And so what we did was we followed Dr. Shaywitz's protocol and created a school that does exactly that. It is a public school. It's not a charter. It's not a private school. Anyone within the boundaries of our district, as well as the surrounding counties, can use their resources to attend our school with the transportation that's provided. And we've gotten numbers currently stand at about 250 students. Next year, we hope to increase it to about 350 students. But we started as a pilot program, and my son was a guinea pig, so to speak, in the original pilot. But it started as 4 locations within the school district, where students were given evidence-based interventions through a partnership we had with a nonprofit in our community that had tutored students and had resources available to contribute to the public school system. So it was an integrated partnership with an outside resource. Then they also trained several of our teachers in the school district. So with that, the program grew into a school within another school. You can imagine, if you build it, they will come. Scenarios what happened. And we didn't advertise, we didn't share necessarily with the entire community. It was just through word of mouth, really, that we grew from 4 pilot schools into a location that had about 150 students. We created an application process, recruited more teachers, also did a national search for a principal, which we recruited from Colorado, who did phenomenal work with Orton Gillingham programs in her school in Colorado. She moved from there over to Jacksonville, and we've just been running at 150 miles per hour since, because honestly, there's nothing in the state of Florida, there's nothing in actually the southeastern United States, there's nothing outside of the southeastern United States that's doing exactly what we're doing. So we're proud to share. We welcome all visitors to come and see how we're doing it, exactly what we're doing. And we want to be a model. We want to make sure that people see what we're doing, because it can be done. It can be replicated in public school models across the country. And we truly hope that those that want to are willing to actually make a change and do that. So I look forward to answering any questions. I want to be quick. I know we are running short on time, but I'm here. I will stay here till midnight to share and answer any questions that you guys may have.
Thank you, Rachel. Our next panelist is Kim Head. Many of you know Kim. She received a doctorate of physical therapy from UCA. She worked for 8 years as a pediatric therapist before launching into education. This was spurred by her own son's struggle in school and the frustrating lack of resources. She sought answers independently and formed a group known as the Dyslexia Project. This grassroots movement of parents was instrumental in writing and passage of Act 1294, the Arkansas Dyslexia Law, in 2013. She is certified in 2 Orton Gillingham programs, and she's currently in her 2nd year of teaching at Catholic High School, where she serves as a dyslexia specialist, a study skills teacher. She's a Title I literacy coordinator and an ACT special testing coordinator. Is there anything that Kim Head doesn't do? Kim.
This day has been magical for me. Bruce Westerman is an amazing man. He's a very humble man. And I just think Arkansas is so privileged to have him and his wife, Sharon, leading the charge. So thank you. And I'd like to do something that I haven't seen today. I'd like to honor some heroes in the audience. So these people are my family. They're the ones who have gone through this journey and really pushed for change. And so if you are a parent, if you are someone with dyslexia, if you are an advocate, would you please stand? Thank you. Thank you for your daily fight. You are the ones who are teaching us truly and leading the way. I remember picking my son up from school, and he looked like a zombie. He was spaced out, angry, depressed, and this was, kindergarten, 1st grade, and he would come home and crawl under the table, sometimes cry. I remember him saying that he was stupid, that he hated school. He never wanted to go back. Noah struggled to learn the alphabet. He struggled to write. He struggled learning individual sounds and how to pull those sounds apart, as Sally was describing. And so he was showing these markers, and this was in stark contrast to this kid that taught himself how to ride his bike and tried to take the washing machine apart when he was 4 years old. And so there was this dichotomy of normalcy and just a beautiful, normal kid, and then this struggle with the written language. So we were the parents that pulled out all the stops. I mean, he attended a great preschool for 3 years, and we did speech therapy when he struggled with language. We did occupational therapy to help him with his handwriting. We even did vision therapy for 32 weeks. We did Learning RX. We had him in private school. I homeschooled him for a little bit. So we tried everything. We were just grasping at straws, trying to find out how to help him. And for me, and I don't know if this is how it is for you if you're a parent, but the most frustrating thing was I felt like I was a good parent and I was doing everything possible for my kid, and I wasn't getting help. I wasn't finding the resources. And you can spin your wheels like this. You can go on and on like this for years, wasting time and money. And they may be answers, but they're not the right answers. Out of every single thing that we tried for years, there was not one professional that ever mentioned dyslexia. And for the parent, Google becomes your best friend. So you start to research and read and watch videos, and if you can read, right, because it's genetic. So yes, I discovered that my son was dyslexic on the internet, and for the first time we got answers. And by the way, my son now, he's 11 years old, my older son, he just turned 11. He reads at grade level. He's a confident athlete, and he loves to write. But this wouldn't have happened if we didn't have the correct resources, if we hadn't been put in touch with the correct assessments and the right interventions. Recent student assessments, and this statistic is going to shock you, and you may already know the statistic well. But according to NAEP, 68% of students in Arkansas are not proficient in reading. So that's almost 70% of our kids. And if we think that 20% of them are dyslexic, well, we've got so much more than a dyslexia block here going on. We have a literacy crisis. This is improper reading instruction. 7 to 8% of students with disabilities read proficiently. Arkansas pays for illiteracy on the backs of the poorest and the least equipped citizens. So illiteracy is directly correlated to substance abuse, incarceration, teen pregnancy, physical abuse, underemployment, suicide, depression, and several states have tried passing a Foundations of Reading exam where teachers who are in colleges have to pass this exam that checks for do you know how to teach a child according to what evidence shows is correct intervention. Bruce Westerman tried to get that done in Arkansas in 2012. So he's been at this for a long time. He's not a bandwagon jumper. And it didn't pass here in Arkansas. But it's not just about, testing a teacher before they get out of college. We've got to think about real, true, quality mentorship. Teachers can't teach what they don't know. And if they don't have the tools, they're not going to know how to teach that child. So we've got to equip them with the tools. I work in Little Rock now at a high school, and I love it there. And we've used Title I funds to bring in tutors, interventionists to work with the boys. And these aren't even necessarily certified teachers, but they do know science-based reading instruction. And in a semester, we've seen gains in reading levels 2, 3, 5 years. And we're seeing changes in self-esteem and impacts on families. So I want to narrow it down to these 3 things that I think are key, and they've already been reiterated throughout the day. But teacher training and quality is very important. Fidelity of instruction. We hear the word fidelity. What does fidelity mean? Fidelity is doing the program as it was intended to be performed. So I have my medical background as well, so I draw medical analogies. If you gave someone an antibiotic and told them to take it for 7 days, twice a day, and they only take it for two days, and then they complain that they didn't get well, then that's the problem of the patient not taking the medication appropriately. So we've got to deliver instruction appropriately. If it's, two times a week for an hour, that's what the kid needs, one-on-one, not 20 minutes in a group of 6. And the last thing is putting these assistive technologies and accommodations in place. Immediate success. Boy went up 20 points on his test when he got extra time. Okay? Having something that you can dictate, Dragon dictation, audiobooks, these are the things that can give a student immediate success. So where do you go for resources? Some of you may know where to go for resources, but if you don't, this is a good place to start, this conference, these professionals here, looking to other states, looking to organizations like the Arkansas Department of Education, the International Dyslexia Association, Decoding Dyslexia Arkansas. Those are your resources here in this state. So our organization, the Dyslexia Project, was involved with the passage of Act 1294 in 2012. And you know that this is a law that requires universal screening or early identification, not necessarily diagnosis, but looking for markers of dyslexia and finding those students. So we screen for hearing, we screen for vision when kids come in kindergarten. Shouldn't we also be screening for something that impacts the very fabric of our society, reading? And I'd like to make you aware of, the federal legislation that's been groundbreaking lately. Talked about the READ Act a lot, and also in Every Student Succeeds Act, which replaced No Student Left Behind, there is embedded in that a comprehensive literacy center. This center is supposed to be a resource for early identification of reading difficulties, evidence-based literacy instruction, and assistive technology support for parents. So I also want to make you aware, I don't know if there's anyone here that is a superintendent or a principal or is thinking about funding. Where do we get the money for this? You can use NSLA funds, you can use Title I funds for early literacy intervention. This is my opinion, but this is not about the money. The U.S. spends more per child on education than any other country, and yet we have lower literacy rates. This is about efficient use of the funds that we already have. I'm going to get a little bit personal here, and I'm going to share a poem with you that I wrote for my son. This was written on Martin Luther King Day. Harry Belafonte says that the denial of appropriate reading intervention to students with dyslexia is the civil rights issue of our time. So this is my dream to Noah. I have a dream that started in the eyes of a tear-streaked little face. One day this boy will not only realize he can read, but he will see past the letters into his own soul. Knowing that God did not just create us equal, he created us different. With the tip of the artist's brush, he painted a human race who solves problems, who creates, who takes us into a future we do not yet know. This future will tear down the walls of a system contained to pencils, books, and standardized tests. These children will be valued for their differences and prized for their giftedness. Discs will be removed to include only ability. Ability for what they were created to do. Ability to shake the gray and boring world of what has always been into the amazing, colorful, three-dimensional, real-life kind of world that is. Leave the norm, the median, the majority. Don't accept the old chant that you must fit in. Why fit in and flounder when you can fly? This dream grew from a boy to a state, and a state to a country, and a country to a world, and what a wonderful world. And it is said that the distance between dreams and reality is action. So I say, let's join together tonight for the betterment of Arkansas and for literacy, and let's take up our task here.
Very well said, Kim. We've got one last panelist. I've gotten to know Reed, and I've heard a little bit about his story, and I'm going to get through his introduction quickly so he can tell the story, because you don't want to miss this. Reed Lynch is the president of Romine Oil Company in DeQueen, Arkansas. He received a bachelor's degree in business from the University of Arkansas in 1992. We were actually there at the same time. We overlapped. He was diagnosed with dyslexia at age 7. He then attended the Shelton School in Dallas. The Shelton School's learning techniques and encouragement allowed Reed to overcome many of his learning obstacles presented in a dyslexia diagnosis. Reed and his wife, Stephanie, have 4 children. His 2 youngest daughters have Down syndrome, and they benefit greatly from alternative learning techniques. Please welcome Reed Lynch.
Thank you very much. You know, when I first got the call to participate, I hadn't really thought much about my background and kind of the development through college and getting out of school, and this just brought so many memories back that I frankly wasn't prepared for. I didn't even think it was a problem, and then all of a sudden I've got these emotions and I'm butterflies, and I don't even want to kind of revisit it again. My story is a little bit in reverse. I was in school, in a Montessori school in Dallas, and one of the teachers, who I remember her asking me questions and kind of probing me for some information. I didn't really know what was going on. Shortly thereafter, my mom said that she thought I need to get tested, and that's where educators, parents and even just friends that are around these children a lot, there needs to be a recognition that something's a little bit different. And thankfully, she saw that. And I just happened to be in Dallas, and the Shelton School was just getting started, so I was tested by Dr. Shelton, and it turned out I did have dyslexia, and I just remember my mom bawling and bawling. I thought, man, this is really bad. And it was, I wasn't as concerned about what it was. I was just so petrified that my mom was so upset, so I thought, well, I better be upset about this too. So I was set apart pretty early. I think I only went to that Montessori school for maybe 2 months when they noticed something was wrong, or something was different. And I was put in a school with like-minded, kids with the same disabilities. Some of them severe. There is a spectrum, as you know. There was a calming effect to that for me. I didn't have all the, well, I'm dumb moments, or I knew something was different and the school was a little different, but as everyone knows, when you have a disability, there's somebody that comes alongside you, gives you that pep talk, that boost that you need at that time. For me, it was Miss Dooley. She was one of the educators early on at the Shelton School, and she wanted us to write I remember, I'll never forget it. She wanted us to write just a short story, just a creative short story. She said, don't worry about your spelling, don't worry about what it looks like. Just take 20 minutes and write this story. So I did it, and I just can't get out of my mind the way she was so complimentary of me, and, oh, your imagination is so great. And I knew my handwriting was horrible, and she didn't say anything about it. And that just gave me a little empowerment. It gave me that little boost to really dig in and try harder, because at times you shut down when you start reading. And the one thing that comes to mind constantly dealing with dyslexia is I always felt like I was working twice as hard for half the result. I would see my friends study nothing like I did, and then I would get a C, and they would get A's and B's, and that was really deflating. And I did get a lot out of the Shelton School. As I went to college, the University of Arkansas at the time did have a pretty good program for learning disabled kids. Again, I got into contact with a lady there that had a pretty good following of young men and women with learning disabilities. And what really helped me was her sitting me down and just saying, I know it's been tough. My first semester was a nightmare. I was convinced I was not going to make it. My wife was my tutor half the time. It was really devastating once I got there and felt like I was on my own and out of that element. That's kind of that safe environment. And she just told me, when she sat me down, she said, it's going to be okay. You're just going to learn different. We're going to figure it out, and we're going to do it. And these kids need that. They need somebody to tell them, we're going to figure it out, whatever the best way is. For me, it was hearing it. Back then, in 87, 86, didn't have audio books just everywhere. So I remember she would take all of my textbooks and read in one of those big cassette recorders, read into it, and at night I would go home and I would read my textbook and listen at the same time. And right away I saw a difference. I was recalling things quicker. I felt more confident. But you just, the services that are needed today, as they say, and I've been out of it so long and hadn't thought about it. I told the panel over lunch, I said, what strikes me is that was 40 years ago. And I thought, how in the world have we not gotten farther than we have now? How is that possible? And this has kind of renewed my interest in being an advocate, and I'm really glad that you're taking this up. And it's very frustrating to know that we haven't made more strides than we have, and hopefully with a renewed focus on that, we can get some services quicker, more efficiently to the kids. And I just thank you for being on this panel, and I thank you for just meeting up again with people that understand. It's so empowering when you're around people that get it, because you can talk to other people about what you're struggling with and what you're going through. But if they haven't really focused and they're not there, and it's having a family member that struggles. It's having that little boy that's sitting in math class. His hands are clammy. He's nervous. And it's not even for math class. It's because he knows he has history next, and he might have to read. And so you miss out on your whole math period because you're petrified they're going to ask you to read in your next class. So I think this has got me wanting to be more involved, and I'm very privileged to be with this group of people, and I appreciate your time.
Okay, if you've got a question and answer note card, if you'll leave those at a table in the back. Where's that table? Okay, the red table in the back. And we have run a little over on time. I appreciate your patience and sticking with us, but we do want to take some questions from the audience. If you've got a question you would like to ask either the Shawitzes or any member on our panel, if you'll come to the microphone, we'll take those in order as you come to the microphone. We've got our first question here.
Hello, my name is Lisa Harrington, and I actually teach at the University of Central Arkansas, and we have a very active program that we're teaching evidence-based reading instruction for our students, and we felt like we got a little knocked down this week through ILA, the International Literacy Association, over the statement that they put out about dyslexia. And I just wanted to know what your response would be to that. They went as far as to say that they don't think that the word dyslexia should even be used. I don't know, have any of you read the statement that was put out by the International Literacy Association?
I'm aware of that, and Dr. Shawitz, what would you say to, it was a question I asked you earlier today, what would you say to people who say dyslexia is not real or we shouldn't use that word?
I'd say I feel so sorry for you, because dyslexia, as we've been hearing, is so real, is so scientifically supported, and affects so many people. Literacy is a general word. Literacy doesn't tell you what the symptoms are. Literacy doesn't tell you where it lives in the brain. Literacy doesn't tell you what the major problem is, or how to diagnose, or what are evidence-based interventions. So it's just what I was saying previously about categories, infectious disease versus a strep throat. Literacy is a category, but it's totally nonspecific. And before we knew about dyslexia and all the science, it was a fill-in. But now that we have the science, it's shameful not to have children, families, and educators take advantage of what science has told us. We're not playing a game. We're dealing with real lives, and we have to use the best source of knowledge to help these children and adults. So, get with it, read or listen to the scientific evidence, and join. And we all do need to get together, and it's wonderful that Congressman Westerman cares so much to be able to do all that he does. But he needs everybody's support. And because something's named International Literacy Association, that doesn't mean that they have any idea what dyslexia is. Their ears are closed. We need to make sure that science, we want science when we're sick to help us diagnose, identify, treat. We need science for education.
Another question on this side.
Yes, sir. My name is Ashley Bowles. I spent 17 years as a juvenile officer. I have seen the school to jail funnel based on children not being educated. It was amazing to me how a child could read a playbook and play football, but couldn't pass a test. And they were sent to alternative schools. They were sent from alternative schools to jail. And one thing that I've noticed is our country and our state spends millions on mental health in schools. For some reason, oppositional defiant disorder, otherwise known as ODD, which is legitimate, but very overly diagnosed is what I see. Why is oppositional defiant disorder only focused on the school? Why aren't these kids going off on their bosses and their part-time jobs? So what I see is ODD as overlooked dyslexia disorder.
I like it.
We can't,
I like it.
the frustration is within the school, not anywhere else. It doesn't happen at home. It doesn't happen at work or on the football field. It happens in the classroom. But what I've seen is the funding comes to these DSM-5 diagnoses like ODD and depression. But we can't get funding to help kids with dyslexia. This is a tragedy. This is what needs to be fixed in our government. This is what Medicaid needs to be spending dollars on, not on mental health disorders that are overly diagnosed because of frustrations in school. Thank you.
Would anybody on the panel like to respond to that?
I couldn't agree with you more.
I mean, I'll jump in and add that we talk about oppositional defiant disorder, and we can prove that unfortunately it affects, or it's labeled on African American males more so than white males, and so it speaks to Dr. Shaywitz's research that dyslexia is severely overlooked in the African American population. And so I've actually looked into connecting with the Juvenile Justice Department here in Florida, to see how we can correct or connect the dots so that more of our children aren't being funneled into the prison pipeline. So thank you for sharing that.
Question over here on this side.
This is sort of a personal question. Are you familiar with the Feuerstein dyslexia program, and if so, what is your opinion of it?
Is it dyslexia or is that autism? I'm familiar
No,
with
it's dyslexia.
I'm not familiar with the Feuerstein program.
Okay.
There's a Feuerstein autism program that I think people have talked about, but I had never heard it associated with dyslexia.
Oh, okay. This is from Israel, this the Feuerstein.
Feuerstein, but
Yeah, 'cause
that program was, as I recall, it's focused on autism rather than dyslexia.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question over on this side of the room, and then we'll get to some of the written questions.
My question is, what do you suggest that you would tell someone that the school has failed? I have a 19-year-old son that works 2 jobs, 7 days a week to make ends meet because he graduated reading on a 3rd grade reading level, and every time I would go to the school and ask for help, they would say he's fine. So now that he's out in the real world, he's not fine. So I'm asking, what do y'all suggest?
That's a very common kind of phenomenon that you're describing, and it doesn't. What I think you should know that people are very interested in adults who are dyslexic, and there are programs that people are trying to be much more creative about figuring out what is the best, what are some practical interventions for adults who are dyslexic. Sally and I are on a committee that there's Barbara Bush Foundation has something called the X Prize, and they're interested in trying to develop programs for adult literacy, and this is a major problem. They've
Yeah,
devoted
because-
millions of dollars for you. There's no quick answer.
Right. There's no help for him now that he's out of school.
Well, no, there will be help. What I'm saying is that people are aware of this as a serious problem. You can't go back in time and say,
Right.
boy, why did you miss this? You didn't miss it, but nobody listened to you. And what I think is happening because of interest in this, Congressman Westerman, Jennifer Brown, people are pushing this at a federal level, and the Arkansas Department of Education now is pushing this at a state level, and the hope is that the number of children who are pushed through the system without reading, like your son, will be reduced. And what I'm saying is I think that there will be programs that people will be creative about to help someone like your son who's through school already. You can't, the sorts of things you can do when you're in school, you can't do as an adult when you're in the workforce. So there are things people have thought about. There's no simple answer, but there are programs for adults, and people are trying to be creative about more practical solutions and sort of telling people, well, go back to school and learn
Right.
phonics.
Exactly.
You can't do that as an adult.
Right, because he has bills to pay.
Yeah, right.
And,
He's got
you know,
family.
I'm labeled as a mad person because this has happened to my son.
Right, and you should be.
It's a
No,
tragedy.
Yeah. Well, the hope is this won't happen to others, and that there will be hope for your son. People are getting creative, I think.
Yeah, we've got some written questions. We've got 3 questions, and we'll wrap it up after that. The first question here is, what do you know about the Davis approach for dyslexia intervention? Davis is the author of The Gift of Dyslexia. Do you recommend it?
I hope I don't get sued. But I am personally not aware of any level of evidence supporting the efficacy of the Davis program.
Oh, sorry. Why don't you tell us about the gift of
Okay, and the other thing I think is really to be aware of, some people go around saying, well, you know, dyslexia is a gift. And we were at a conference at Princeton, and somebody said that, and a woman got up and said, well, I told my daughter that her dyslexia is a gift. And my daughter said, well, good, then can I give it back? So I think it's a paradox, but if we make it all into a gift, that excuses us from having given much, much needed help. So it's not a gift, it's not an advantage, it's not this. It's part of a bigger picture. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Next question, and it may be over for this side of the table. Why is it so hard to get identified in Arkansas?
Two reasons. One, lack of knowledge. Two, egos.
You want to jump in on that
I'll
one?
jump in.
It may,
And I'm
is it hard to
speaking
get identified
for-
in Florida?
It most certainly was. We did not get identified, and only because of district friends did we actually get an SLD diagnosis. I think, honestly, they felt they were doing what was required of them by law. I think they felt they were following the RTI process. I think they felt that my son did not struggle enough to fall into the learning disabilities category. And so they did the best they could with the information they have. So I agree that it is lack of understanding, lack of knowledge, lack of acceptance to be pushed to do more, because they just didn't necessarily have to.
We've kept you about 45 minutes longer than we said we would, so I'm going to go one last question here. It says, I am a mother of a 12-year-old son, and thankfully I'm also a nurse who noticed early on that something wasn't right. within his learning. In order to get him an in-depth test as well as personally testing it cost us $4,000. We did this because the school gave him a simplistic test and grouped him as an expressive
Language.
Okay. You know the question before I read it. In what ways are being done to help the parents have an in-depth testing done if they can't afford it since it's not a medical diagnosis yet? Also, what things are being done to help teach specifically dyslexic kiddos in schools?
Well, in Arkansas, with the law passing, you don't have to have a diagnosis. That was the whole point, is so that you can just identify the markers and get them the intervention immediately. We don't have to make people jump through hoops to get them what they need. I mean, if I'm a mom searching on the internet and I can figure out within 10 minutes that my kid is dyslexic, we can do this. And it's just identifying those markers and getting them what they need. I don't know how it can be more simple. So diagnosis, paying $4,000 for a label isn't necessary in my opinion. But there are creative ways to solve the...
I think Congressman is looking at me because he knows what I'm going to say. I think one is, I don't like it when people refer to this as a label. Is cancer a label? Is arthritis a label? It's a diagnosis. And when you have a diagnosis, it gives you an explanation. The problem has a name. We know what the basic issue is. And again, I'm going to repeat myself, but it gives you the knowledge of who you are, how you function, what you need to do. So I think for somebody to go through life thinking, well, I can't do this well, and I can't, it's mumbo jumbo. You need a diagnosis. You need to know what you have. It has a name, and then you can meet other people who have the same condition. You're not just isolated, floating around in space somewhere. I think the problem is that schools aren't participating actively in the diagnostic or identification, process, and that it is expensive. I think things need to be done about that, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try to get the diagnosis. To leave people, that's where anxiety comes from. It comes from not knowing what you have, because you don't know when it's going to come out, what it's going to do. If you have dyslexia, you can learn about what you have and learn how you can help yourself, what you can do about it. So I think to deprive someone of a diagnosis is really terrible. It's not using 21st century science to really help that individual go forward.
One more question, quickly.
I'll make it quick. You mentioned that one of the issues is that schools aren't identifying or recognizing dyslexia as a diagnosis, and I think that has something to do with it not being one of the handicapping conditions under IDEA that a child can receive special education services for. How close do you think we are in making that one of the handicapping conditions for special education?
Okay.
Can I answer that one? She's already told me Congress needs to rewrite it.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
That was my answer. I want to hear the
Go
professional.
ahead. I didn't hear you. Go ahead, please.
I said you've already told me that Congress needs to rewrite IDEA.
It's public now, but I really would want to hear it from you.
All right. Doctors Bennett and Sally Shaywitz, thank you. Thank you for taking time to come here. Thank you for your passion, and thank you for a passion that's driven from compassion, for your love, for your fellow man, for our children across this country. Thank you for your work. You've got much greater rewards than anything financial you'll ever receive for the work that you're doing. Rachel, thank you for coming all the way from Florida to share with us about Grasp Academy. Kim, thank you so much for the work you do here in the state, advocating on behalf of not just your son, but so many children across our state who need these interventions, who need this help. And Reed, thank you. Thank you for re-engaging. Thank you for being a part of our panel tonight and sharing your personal story. You told us today at lunch that it kind of hurts to bring this back up. It's something you'd gotten past. You said when you got out of college, you didn't want any more education. You wanted to go use that education. And I just appreciate your honesty and your openness in your story so much. And thank you to everyone here for participating. Thank you for sticking with us tonight. And thank you most of all because you're concerned about others, and the work you're doing will be measured by the successes in other people. And that is a noble cause, and I take my hat off to you, and I applaud you for that. God bless you, and have a great evening.
Picture.